Now, for more on the Prime Minister's economic to-do list, I'm joined by Jesper Koll, Managing Director of Research, JP Morgan in Tokyo. Welcome to the show. Good to see you again. Let me start with this. The national debt, the deflation, the inflation questions, all these issues. Why is Japan facing all these problems right now?
Look, you basically have had a decade of stagnation here. You had this enormous collapse of the bubble economy. You had, close to a financial crisis. And quite frankly, you had very, very defunct and dysfunctional government with a new prime minister coming in practically every year. And the good news now is that Prime Minister Abe is putting an end to that. You will get policy consistency. Already he's been in power for 2 years, and after Sunday's election, it's very clear that Prime Minister Abe and his economic team will be in power for at least another 2 or 3 years, and that's what the economy needs: consistency and certainty and stability.
People forget that there's been a number of changes, at least at the top in Japan. There's a couple things I want to touch on upon you, and I want to get your take on it. First, talk about the sales tax increase. That was controversial from the beginning. It was implemented and then later put on hold, at least the second half of it. So now what happens to that?
Well, basically, Japan has a very, very dysfunctional tax collection system. Tax revenues as a share of national income are one of the lowest amongst the advanced industrialized economies, while at the same time the social welfare, the social security system, is on par with what you've got in Northern Europe. So there's this imbalance, and as a result of that, Japan has this record amount of public debt here. The key point, however, is how are you going to fix the deficit situation? Yes, you need a better tax system, but you also need economic growth. Only when incomes rise, only when profits rise, only when real estate prices rise, only when you've got inflation rather than deflation, that's when tax revenues are going to rise. And that's exactly what the government is trying to do now: kickstart the Japanese economy so that tax revenues are going to rise through growth rather than additional tax increases.
Okay. So they need more money to pay off the debt. The other issue that's been brought up is higher wages. I mean, Abe wants people to get paid more, right?
Exactly, and here we are on a very, very correct path. You've seen that Japan's unemployment rate has fallen, very nicely from about 5% 2 years ago to 3.5%. The labor market is very tight, and wage increases are beginning to come through. And in fact, for 2015, the real purchasing power of Mr. and Mrs. Watanabe is going to be increasing for the first time in almost a decade. That's where the economy is going to get a chance.
And there's people who oppose this. I imagine some of the businesses are a little nervous about this.
It's interesting because you actually have got corporate Japan doing very well. You know that the yen has depreciated by more than 40%. Corporate Japan is actually generating record profitability right now, and channeling some of these record profits back into higher pay is really a win-win situation.
That said, so how do we feel today after the big election? Do we feel a little bit more excited about the economy in Japan, or we still have some outstanding questions that we have to continue to wait? I guess I'm asking for your outlook for next year.
Look, I mean, there's always questions out there. The key point is that the policy regime in Japan, the government is stable, that they will be around for at least, 2 to 3 years. Nothing weird, nothing extraordinary is going to happen. And as a result of that, the private sector is going to have its chance to actually define its underlying growth rate. And the one message that you got to have, the one reason for why you want to be optimistic on Japan for 2015 is that corporate Japan is super competitive. Whether it's the car companies, the chemicals companies, the electronics companies, the Japanese banks, you do find them in a super competitive position, and that's what's going to generate excitement in 2015.
What are you worried about?
What I'm worried about is, a dollar hypercycle, which is to say that, the American currency has begun to appreciate very sharply. If the Federal Reserve increases interest rates and the dollar enters a hypercycle, against the yen going to 140, 150, or even 160, that, would put a lot of pressure on Japan's largest trading partner, which is the People's Republic of China and the rest of Asia.
Jesper Koll at JP Morgan, good to see you again. Have a great morning there in Japan. Thank